Hello and welcome to part 3 of this video tutorial series. My name is still Johnny, and in this portion of the tutorial we're going to be talking about basic road construction, but there's a few things we've got to get through first. I know we'll get there eventually, but bear with me. So the first thing I want to talk about quickly, I shouldn't really talk about it quickly because it's probably the most important stage of any map really, but it's something called the blockout phase. And what this is, if you remember back in the first part of this tutorial, I talked a little bit about having a map idea and having an idea of what you want to build before you want to build it. And whether you use Photoshop or a bit of paper to sketch out your map idea, whatever the case is, the stage after that ideally should be opening up Radiant and laying in your entire map using rudimentary block, brush or patch forms. The reason this is a good idea, well actually there's many reasons, but one of them is this is the point where you're going to find out whether your idea is actually going to work and whether it's worth pursuing and putting the hours of work in needed to bring it up to a certain standard. And whilst it's in rudimentary form, you can make changes without putting too much work into it. You need to make sure that your map is going to be everything you want it to be before you start doing any kind of detail work. Although this seems slightly off topic for our terrain, another good reason for doing a blockout is for scale. We need to scale our buildings, but we also need to scale our terrain, and in this case we're looking at the new Villas Geo that came with the COD2 version of the tools, and there's a lot of roads in here, and when it comes to scale there's certain things you need to think about and certain things we need to apply to keep our roads in scale with the rest of our geometry. And there's a couple of little tricks we can use to do that, and I just want to take you through those quickly. So the first way we can scale our road, and probably the most obvious, is something called gameplay standards. I've talked about these before in my other tutorials, and what these are a standard set of widths and measurements that allow us to scale our geometry for buildings, for roads, for everything else. And you can find these on the Mappers United wiki. I will post a link underneath this video or wherever else this video is posted. You can navigate your way to whatever version of the game or the tools you happen to be using, because they do change depending on the version you use, and you'll be able to find those measurements on there under technical references. And we could use that obviously as well, but there's a couple of other things we could do. The first being, if you're building something a little bit out there, a little bit different, what I like to do is import a model of the type of vehicle that I foresee that will use this kind of road. We could perfectly scale our road to that model and jobs are good. So the two ways there are gameplay standards and using models to be able to scale our road. Also, we could use the rest of our geometry, because if we use gameplay standards to create our buildings, for example, that will help us to scale our geometry for our roads as well. So you need to be aware of the fact that whatever type of road you're building, you have to scale it properly. Use gameplay standards, import a model of the type of vehicle you foresee using this road, and also use your surrounding geometry that is correctly scaled to also scale your roads. So that's it. Now we're going to talk a little bit about how to actually construct a road. I hear you crying for joy. So let's pretend we're working with a fully blocked out map here, and we've come to the stage where we're actually happy with it and we want to start laying in some more detailed geometry, and we're of course doing our terrain at this stage. And it all starts with a single patch, and I like to work with my roads in small sections. It really gives us a little bit more control over what we're doing with it. And I've just laid out this brush, and it's the dimensions I want for our scale in width. In height I've made it slightly longer than the width because I prefer to work with a sort of rectangular patch. This is where it all begins. So let's convert this into a terrain patch. So I'm going to go up to patch, simple terrain. How many verts shall we add? Well, this counts for all kinds of terrain. I like to start with as few verts as possible. You'll see why as we move along here. So I'm just going to create this patch using 2 and 2. Click OK. This is our starting point. Next we need to think about where our road is going to go. In this case, because we've got our map plan, we've already laid it out, we know that our road is going to curve around this way. Of course I'm just freestyling it, but I want this road to curve around this way to start with. So let's do that. I should explain at this point that just like anything else in Radiant, there's 10, 20 or 30 different ways to be able to do something, and everyone has their own way of doing things. The technique I'm about to show you is not only easy, but it'll also work for any version of the tools you happen to be using. A lot of the later versions of the tools have different functions that make this kind of thing easier. There's also different techniques that we can use, say arbitrary rotations, that sort of thing. This technique is very easy. It will take a little bit of practice on your part, but ultimately you'll be able to create the kind of curvy looking road that you really want, and it's going to be easy, so that's why I'm showing it to you. So with that being said, now it's time to create our little curve, and as we've already discussed, we're going to have it curve around this way. I'm not going to use any curve patches, I'm simply going to use terrain patches. And to do that, I'm just going to take a copy of this patch and I'm just going to lay it up here. Now we could at this point start blindly moving verts around trying to create a curve, but it's going to be pretty hard doing it that way, especially to keep our road symmetrical. And instead what I like to do is use this copied patch, press R to enter free rotate mode. You can see that by the patch turning purple. Left click drag so the patch rotates, and I'm just going to rotate it to the point where I think this curve is going to end up roughly, and I'm also then going to position this patch roughly where this curve is going to end. In this case, yeah, I think it's about there. So we're going to have a patch that curves into this location and finish in this angle here. So let's create our curve, and to do that I'm going to take a copy of this rotated patch, lay it back onto itself as close as I possibly can down here, bring up your verts, and I'm just going to drag these down to meet this patch. Next we need to do some welding, so these are going to be our destination patches. If you remember from part 2, do a quick weld so all these verts are welded. Now we need to actually create the curve in here, and to do that I'm just going to select these two verts, add a new row of columns, select that new row of columns, and I'm just going to shift it out that way, and already you can see a nice little curve beginning to appear. Now at the moment we've used very few verts, and you could add more vertice columns in here and start making a more complex curve. Personally, I think that is actually enough of a curve for now. If you don't think it is, you could carry on adding verts, but for me that's looking okay for what I want. It's starting to curve around this way. So we've got a nice little curve starting to appear here, and moving on, we may or may not actually need our little guide patch here. In this particular case I'm going to keep it, and let's say our road curves around here. Well, instead of creating a new patch, which we could using exactly the same technique, well, let's save ourselves a bit of time and just use our already created little curve, and let's rotate that around, line it back up as best we possibly can with our original patches over here, weld up as we go, and already we've started to create a nice little curve in here. And just for argument's sake, our road curves around here again. I want to save myself some time here, and eventually we might come to a point where we have to create a new patch for a different type of curve. That's not going to happen just yet. Let's move on up here a little bit, and let's weld that back together. Okay, let's say for example we hit a point where we have to do a 90-degree curve. Well, a 90-degree curve is always going to be tricky, but I'm going to show you how to go about doing that. So we want to do our 90-degree bend coming around this way, and to do that again I'm going to give myself a little guide patch. So I'm just going to take a copy of this one here, and it's going to come in around this way, and it's tricky because it uses more verts, and it will take practice to do this, but I'm just going to walk you through it quickly. Again, take a copy of that and then just lay our verts into each other down here, do our quick weld, bang those in, make sure they're welded up. Now we need to create our curve. So again, same process, new column, shift it over, only this time we're going to have to do some individual vert manipulation just to get this right, and it's like I say, this is just going to take some practice on your part, but it is possible, as I'll hopefully demonstrate for you. And I'm just going to move these about. We should be able to create a decent 90-degree curve just using 3 columns. And again, I'm just shifting these by hand, and I'll actually, at the end of this tutorial, I'll give you a little tip on how to practice these. It's actually quite easy once you get the hang of it. But anyway, there it is, 90-degree curve. Not perfect, but it doesn't matter, because at the end of it, it's all about the texturing, and if we can achieve the texture appearance that we want, who really cares? No one else is going to see this except us. As long as we can achieve the texture appearance we want, that's all that matters. So that's our 90-degree bend, and I think we've got enough of this road in here now. Just to move on to the next part, we've got a nice curve coming through here, and it's a nice 90-degree bend. And the next stage, I'm just going to make sure I've got enough verts into these patches here. Maybe add another one in down here. And at the moment, all of our patches are in these individual little segments, and for the next stage we need to make as many of these segments into one single patch as possible. So with them all selected, press W to merge. That's created this amount, and sometimes they don't always merge, and that's because of the change in direction. I think it depends on the angle, and if we didn't have this 90-degree bend, it'd probably all merge together. But just try and make as many of these as one patch as possible, because we're going to add some more vertices into this newly created patch basically, and we're going to do some displacement and create some shape into this road. Since we couldn't merge these all together, I might as well just start in this little section down here. So I'm just going to add some vertices through the middle here. I'm going to add this many to start with, and of course, see, this is why we should make as many of these patches as merged as possible, because we'll just have to repeat the process, and that's just going to mean more work. So there we go, we've got that even now. Next stage, I'm just going to come back down here. Again, we're not worrying about texturing, we're just going to add a little bit of shape into this. Now at the moment we're building an asphalt type road, and the majority of asphalt roads tend to have a slope generating from the middle of it. That's so water can run off it. So let's create a little bit of height into that. So let's shift those up a little, and those maybe that's a little bit too soft. Let's get that up a bit more, and depending on the road you're building, that will determine how many verts you need to add into this road. If it was a dirt road, for example, I'd add probably a lot more, but for this example we're actually going to do a minimal amount of displacement just to create a bit of shape. And already we've got a nice little curved edge to this road, and that's fine for now. The next thing we can do, say for example our road started to have an incline at this point in time. At this point in time, and this point in the road, we could grab these and start moving them up, and we can start creating our incline. And it's just going to be quite a small incline, but we can grab them, just move them up, and we can do this one row at a time, making sure we get a nice smooth incline going. And maybe down here they start to go downhill instead of uphill, so let's do that. It goes down there, these go down a bit more, creating a nice little dip. Yeah, that'll do. Nice little dip and a nice little incline at the end, and that's how we can add a little bit of a hill into our terrain at this point. So we started laying in the foundation of a nice curvy little road here. We got an incline, a dip, we got some shape to it, and the next stage we're going to think about adding some terrain to surround this road, and there's a few things that might come up with doing it. There's a few little tips and tricks I can show you, so I'm going to leave that for another part of this tutorial, and I'm going to bring this one to a close. So we've covered quite a few things here, so practice with that, and I'll see you in the next part. Cheers.